All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Trevor Grassi, and today I have the privilege and honor of speaking with my good friend Marco Vigato, who is an author, explorer, researcher, and who has been working on investigating some of the underworlds of Mexico, much like I've been talking about what we're doing in Egypt and some of my other broadcasts. Marco has basically been doing that in Mexico and working on some amazing projects, specifically at Mitla, which we're going to talk about today, which is a really important site that I got to visit quickly, actually, just back in 2013. But Marco is also the author of this absolutely amazing book called The Empires of Atlantis, The Origins of Ancient Civilizations and Mystery Traditions Throughout the Ages. And so I'm hoping we could talk a little bit about this before we get into Meetla today. But it's been many years I've been following your work, and it's all so great. So I'm really excited to finally speak with you face to face, and very excited to have you here with us. So welcome, Marco. Excited to get
Thank
into
you so
this.
much, Trevor. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Yeah, very excited about this. So I think we're going to start with I want to ask you to explain a little bit about, your origins, how you got into archaeology, and what first piqued your interest in studying subjects related to Atlantis and earlier civilizations. So if you want to start with some of
Well,
that.
Yes, well, I'm originally from Italy, even though I've been living in Mexico now for the past 10 years. I'm married to a wonderful Mexican woman. We have three amazing children here in Mexico, which has given me the opportunity to explore a lot more of the pre-Hispanic past of Mexico, these great civilizations that succeeded themselves here in Mexico. But my interest for history and archaeology actually goes back a lot farther. I would say I've been interested in the ancient past, and particularly in the enigmas of the ancient past since a very early age. My dad, he studied archaeology, so it would take me on archaeological sites and active excavations throughout much of my childhood. So I pretty much grew up with these visiting sites throughout the world. And then, obviously, over the years, I was able to visit more of these incredible megalithic sites on nearly every continent, from Egypt to Peru, South America, Mexico, obviously, Southeast Asia. So that has given me, I think, a pretty broad perspective of ancient civilizations, ancient cultures around the world. And that's how I started to put together these theory, this idea about the possibility that all these different cultures and the megalithic monuments, these highly mysterious, highly enigmatic megalithic structures that we find pretty much all over the world, may be somehow connected, whether by means of cultural diffusion or through perhaps a common ancestor civilization. That's when I then got interested in the question of Atlantis, or the possibility of a lost civilization of the last ice age. I must say that one of the most influential books I had the chance to read growing up was Graham Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods. There was a really transformational reading for me. It really opened up these new world of possibilities, so many questions concerning our ancient past. And to a very large extent, is what also prompted me on my own personal quest for these lost civilization that has now taken me to over 50 countries around the world, 15 years of research, the product of which is the book that now you have in your hands, the Empires of Atlantis.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I can say as well, I haven't visited quite that many countries, but when you start to visit multiple countries around the world, yeah, it's very clear that there must be a cultural diffusion or a common ancestor. There's no way that all of these things that when you really look into them, they're so similar from continent to continent. You have to assume that there was something tying them together. Um, so yeah, I mean, you are Figure of the Gods was a very influential book for me as well. I had met John Anthony West, and I had begun to speak with him a few years earlier before I found Fingerprints of the Gods. But that ended up, really showing that there was something tying all these lands together. It really made it an international story. So I think this book is actually one of the best books that's come out in that tradition since that time. I think it's built in the same tradition, let's say, of Blavatsky to Manly Hall to Edgar Casey even and Graham Hancock in more recent times. Ignatius Donnelly, maybe, all these people who have been speaking about Atlantis and really trying to bring scientific evidence to work with the facts of what we actually know and not jumping to conclusions. And yeah, I just said this is so well done. I really recommend this to everyone. And now I think we can talk a little bit about it. In terms of, I guess I would ask you to start. I might have more specific questions about it, but in general, I would just ask you first to explain, I don't know, I guess the main themes or what led you to make this book.
What I tried to do and to accomplish with this book is combining two very different perspectives. One, which is that of archaeology, of archaeological science, which is much more fact-based and tries in a way to summarize what is the state of the art of archaeological research in light of the many new discoveries that have taken place in Southeast Turkey, for instance, with Göbekli Tepe, what we have learned about the origin of these mysterious megalithic monuments like the Giza pyramids, sites like Tiwanaku, the Mexican pyramids, Angkor Wat, all around the world, and combine these with the perspective of the esoteric tradition. And so you mentioned some of the big names, obviously, in the Western esoteric tradition, starting with the Theosophical movement, the Rosicrucians, and then continuing more into the 20th centuries with the likes of René Guénon, for instance, Rudolf Steiner, and so on. And this is to show how these two perspectives, which are very often pictured as if at odds with each other, in fact, do complement each other really, really well. I think you need both to get to a full understanding of our ancient past, particularly when we're talking about events that likely occurred 10,000 or maybe even tens of thousands of years ago. There are avenues of knowledge that are still unexplored, at least to our modern Western materialistic science, but which I believe can provide a very helpful insights into the ancient past beyond the possibilities of archaeological science. So what I try to do, as I said, with this book is complementing, combining together these two perspectives in order to paint a picture of what that civilization may have looked like and its likely evolution. I think very often in this kind of works, we talk about either the possibility that such a civilization existed through the different monuments that they may have left behind in different parts of the world. Some other works talk more about the mythical traditions that we find, for instance, around this idea of the cycles of civilization or the ages of men. Other books taken altogether a different perspective by focusing exclusively on the esoteric perspective. What I try to do is, again, like combining all of these in a work that traces what I believe is a likely outline of the evolution of these civilization. When we're talking about these forgotten episode of civilization that authors like Graham Hancock have proposed may have existed at the end of the last ice age, it's hard to imagine it as a living civilization that certainly went through multiple cycles of expansion, of decline. And something that I discovered throughout my research is that the influence evidence of these lost civilization, however we want to call it, Atlantis or by any other name, continued for many thousands of years after its supposed demise. So I also go and look for the evidence of a survival of these Atlantean tradition or Neo-Atlantean tradition, as they call it, in the following thousands of years, long after the end of the last ice age and almost reaching to the beginning of the historical period when I believe this civilization still went on, although in a much diminished form, to influence those or to provide those first sparkles of civilization that then trigger the beginning of Egyptian civilization, Sumerian civilization, and Mesoamerican civilization as well.
Yeah, yeah, very good point. That I think I was saying before we started recording as we were talking, I was just saying this is very close to the book that I tried to write originally because I think it was something very much missing that we look to the monuments themselves and are actually trying to put the picture together without locking ourselves into some narrative that we've already been told, which is a flaw of much of the academic community, at least, and I wouldn't say all, but yeah, I think a lot of the people looking into it are sometimes looking into the mythology somewhat and seeing these creation myths, which sometimes are addressing, the cosmological origin of the whole universe, but sometimes speaking about the origin of their own culture. And so there's mythology that borders on historical documentation as well. But a lot of the people who are really looking into it are not seeing the esoteric side. They're not looking to the mystery school tradition, which is, this long lineage of knowledge being held in secret that does come directly from a lot of these traditions that have these pyramids, these temples, and these underground locations as well. Those are all tied to what we call the mystery religion or the mystery tradition, which is basically designed to hold this true history that's been lost. And like you say, it does correlate very well with what we see, physical evidence, as well as yeah, some of these people like Blavatsky or even yeah, Steiner, like you said, they're talking about these things, Atlantis being real, Lemuria before then, and civilizations going back tens of thousands of years, like you say. So, yeah, I think it's really fantastic that you actually were able to incorporate both those sides of that into this, as well as looking to the individual indigenous cultures, their own histories, and you put together such a great compilation of information that people can actually use to make an informed decision about it. So
Yeah,
appreciative for that book.
and I think it's something that is very hard to grasp from the perspective of archaeological science. First of all, because of its materialistic bias that we have, at least in the scientific world, of just focusing on what we can measure and control, and essentially like ignoring even the possibility that a whole world may exist out there beyond the reaches of our Western science. And then the specialization that modern science brings. You now have archaeologists that not only specialize and focus on a single area of the world or a single civilization, but they may even specialize on the ceramics of a given time period, for instance, certain categories of artifacts. So these are specialization where I think it's very important for the progress, for the advancement of science. At the end of the day, it makes you lose or miss the forest for the trees in a way, makes you lose up that bigger picture, the bigger perspective that earlier authors, if you go back to even the mid 1900s, the 1800s, they had this ability to span and cover across multiple different disciplines. Now, immediately, anyone who even tries to make a connection between or among all these different disciplines, like archaeology, anthropology, esoteric science, and a bunch of different disciplines like geology, for instance, astronomy, is immediately labeled as a pseudoscientist or a pseudo-archaeologist. But I think that's exactly what is needed, this ability of bringing multiple disciplines together because this is such a complex problem that involves questions, yes, of archaeology, but also of geology, of evolution, of astronomy. There are so many different aspects to it. That's why it's such a complex issue.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely agree with you. And yeah, John, who's, such a respected teacher for me, he would always insist that that is one of the major flaws of our world today is this over compartmentalization and specialization. Just as you say, you lose the forest for the trees. And it really takes such a deep level of dedication to actually put together these pieces from all over the world and look at every piece of it. And this is what John described a golden age civilization actually looking like is like we see in Egypt, where they studied astronomy and medicine, science, art, music, religion, and politics. It was all together. It was all studied as one thing, and it was all, there were central themes that tied all of these fields together. And I think if we maybe organized our sciences a little more like that in the modern day, we'd probably make a lot more progress, or a lot more people would be able to put together these big puzzles that have so many pieces. So yeah, again, I think your book is a sometimes I call them weapons in the war of ideas. It's that's a heavy piece of material that, we can drop, any of us like me who, I want to describe these things. That's one of the great resources. I can just say, well, here's another compilation where we're seeing so much of the relevant details. Um, do you have any plans for a second book or anything? Um,
Yes, I'm currently working on a second book that is going to focus
nice.
a lot more on Mesoamerica, on ancient Mexico, Central America, and is a question of the origin of Mesoamerican civilization, which I think connects directly to these broader lost civilization idea, how exactly civilization arose in Mesoamerica and its possible connections, not only to old world cultures, but possibly to an even earlier lost civilization of the past ice age. So I've been studying a lot of the Olmec sites, many other little known sites around Mexico. And this is, I think, also a good segue, good connection with the work I've been doing here, the more archaeological work, scientific work I've been doing here in Mexico, trying to uncover evidence for these lost civilization here in Mexico.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I know there are many legends in Mexico of these travelers coming from the Eastern Ocean, from the Atlantic, from I know that there's Nalamp was one, there's Quetzalcoatl, there's several of these traditions saying that, some of these civilizing characters or knowledge came from the ocean, and that kind of sets it up. Yeah, could you mention a little bit about that before we get into
Yeah,
specifically Meatla?
Yeah, I think there are two very interesting traditions that you find across Mesoamerica. There are, in a way, some of the foundational myths of Mesoamerican civilization. The first one is this idea of cyclical time that you find, for instance, among the Mayas with these endless repetition of cycles of time that span thousands, in some cases, even tens of thousands of years. And this idea that there were multiple destructions of humanity. There were previous humanities, previous civilizations, and civilization in a way had to start over again after those cataclysms. You have it and you find it in Maya cosmology, in this Aztec idea of the five suns, for instance, which ended in cataclysm, according to which we're living in the fifth age of the world, but there were clearly four ages before our own, which all ended in some sort of natural disaster, whether it was a rain of fire or a deluge or some other natural cataclysm. And the other myth is that of those civilizing heroes, which, according to most traditions from Mexico, Central, South America, they came in very ancient times and they brought the seeds of civilization to the first people, to the first inhabitants of those lands. They're almost invariably described as foreigners, as strangers with different characteristics, a different culture from that of the local population, who brought such gifts as agriculture, mathematics, architecture, science, astronomy, the calendar, and in a way they started or they initiated civilization in Mesoamerica. Something very similar, for instance, what you find on the other side of the world in Egypt, in Sumer, with those accounts of the foundation of Sumerian civilization, Oannes, the Apkallos, these gods or these sages who came in very ancient times. And there are surprising similarities. All of these civilizing gods, they are invariably associated with agriculture, with astronomy, the calendar, with monumental architecture as well. So you find it here in Mesoamerica in the same ways you find it at places like Göbekli Tepe in Sumer in Egypt, a very close association between what I would say are unexplained megalithic monumental structures, the birth of agriculture. We're talking about a time immediately after the end of the last ice age, immediately after the Younger Dryas, and the sudden appearance of what I consider is a more advanced form of civilization across the world, which interestingly seem to have taken place around the same time. We're talking about 10,000 to 8,000 years ago, all over the world, in very different places. You have this sudden appearance, this sudden emergence of agriculture all around the same time in places like Sumer, Egypt, India, China, the Andes of South America, and Mexico, always associated with these traditions about mysterious strangers or sages who came from the sea and brought the seeds of civilization. So that's what I find really fascinating. And obviously, it's a search for the origins of civilization, trying in a way to trace the footsteps or walk in the footsteps of these civilizing heroes, trying to understand who they were, where did they come from, and what gifts of civilization did they bring to all these different peoples around the world.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. The there are so many similarities between those stories, like the Apkallu and Sumer, like you say, they bringing the seeds of civilization. A lot of the times, well, almost always they're coming out from the Atlantic, and some of them are as well are have these part fish features like Dagon, Owanes, um, like mermaids almost, or possibly serpent-like bodies or fish-like bodies, this strange imagery, but a very unique detail that we see, Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent, all this imagery of the bird and snake I find all over the world too. But very, very interesting as well. Like you say, the calendar cycles are something that really absolutely ties it together when you start to see that they're all showing the precessional cycle and that this was some of the most important knowledge they considered to have themselves, which is why they spent so much time preserving it. Um, and yeah, like the long count in Mexico as well, that you see, like you say, it's divided into five sections. It's similar to the what's called the Kepler cycle in Egypt, which is a cycle of five periods. And it's also interesting to me
Or
that
this Greek idea of the ages of men, the Yuga cycles in India. It's a tradition you find throughout the world.
yeah, yeah, Plato called it the great year. And like you say, the cyclic regeneration and these cataclysms and restarts, you see this in the Yuga system. You see the precessional calendars all over Egypt. And all of this same type of math and geometry, especially, is also very telling that the Sumerians had very similar stuff all across the world. And it's the numbers and math that is very convincing to me too. Really made it undeniable, I'd say. But yeah, everywhere you have astronomy, the megalithic structures, this keys to the megalithic building, and these legends of the gods, they're often just called, who came and brought all that. So yeah, really great stuff to be bringing together. And Yeah, it's great to hear that you're going to be doing another book, especially if it's about Central America,
Mhm.
because it's a very important part of it. And like we say, we have a lot of accounts of some of that first culture coming out of the Atlantic as well. So maybe we can start linking into Mitla and what's been going on there.
Mhm.
This is a very important site that, like I said, when I visited a long time ago, I ended up just getting a couple hours to check it out, and I didn't get to explore all of it very much, but that's something that stayed in my mind for a long time because I remember hearing back then that this was an underworld. And I'd just say in general that I feel that the new frontier of archaeology is the underground. We've so well explored so many of these sites above ground. Um, the new frontier is actually what's below. And I think the next great discoveries in the next centuries to come, it's really going to be about getting underneath. And so I'm very excited with our friends at the Kaffa project in Italy scanning under Giza. Our friend Louis de Cordier, who's working at Hawara in Egypt and just brought new scans of the underground there. There's a lot of finally attention and care being given to these underground sites and the revelation that there are these entire underworlds or underground cities. These are terms that help people put an image to it to understand these aren't just chambers here and there. So yeah, I would say Mitla, in my understanding, it's always been, maybe aside from Teotihuacan, at least, probably one of the most important underworld sites in Mexico because it's been described as this whole labyrinth underground. It's been described, I believe, be as an underworld, an entrance to the underworld, much like Giza is described, the halls of Amenti or Rose Tau. The Rose Tau being the name of the Giza Plateau in ancient times, literally meaning the mouth of the caves or the entrance into the caves. So I see Mitla as one of the most important underworlds of Mexico,
It
basically.
is.
Kind of like Hawara and Giza, you have Teotihuacan and Mitla are probably the two most important underground structures. So really excited to get into this. And you have some slides you can show us of this as well.
Yes.
So
Yes.
maybe we could just get into the whole general story
Yeah,
of Mitla and
absolutely.
I'll let you go with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Maybe even before I talk about the project, let me tell you a little bit more about what drove me to Mitla and how this fascination with this site started. I think you summarize it very well. My, I would say, like my love relationship with Mitla started now more than 20 years ago when I was 14 and I had a chance of visiting Mitla for the first time with my parents. It was on my first trip to Mexico. And I remember being very impressed, remaining awestruck by the scale, by the size, the precision of the architecture. This is not something you find at many other Mexican sites. I think Mitla is probably in all of Mexico the only one or one of the very few genuinely megalithic sites on a scale that compares to Egypt, to Peru, for instance. In Mitla, you have megalithic constructions that are built with stone blocks weighing in the tens of tons. There is a one stone block which is estimated to weigh over 300 tons at Mitla. You find evidence of these very precisely built, constructed megalithic buildings all over the site. So that's one aspect of Mitla. The second
Could I
aspect,
ask you too? There aren't many
mhm,
sites in Mexico that have megaliths, right? I mean,
yes.
there are amazing constructions and pyramids of stone all over Mexico, but there are not many sites where there are actually huge stones like that. Is that
Right.
right?
There are not many sites that are megalithic. If you think about Maya architecture, even a very important site like Teotihuacan, for instance, the vast majority of the architecture at those sites consists of relatively small stones cemented together. The majority of Maya sites, if you think about Chichen Itza, for instance, they're very impressive sites from an architectural point of view, but the stones used are relatively small. It's mostly smaller stones cemented together. There are few sites, as I said, in Mexico are generally megalithic. Then obviously You have megalithic artifacts. If you think about the Olmec sites, you have these
Yeah.
incredible colossal stone heads, some of which weigh over 50 tons. But these are isolated monuments. You have stelas, you have the colossal stone heads, for instance. But Mitla is a truly megalithic site in the sense that we can really talk about megalithic architecture. You have buildings, you have palaces, you have subterranean chambers, tombs, all built with huge stone blocks, very precisely fitted together. So to me, it's a whole different level of architectural achievement, the quality of the architecture, the sophistication of the structure at Mitla. I would dare to say it's unparalleled in ancient Mexico and Mesoamerica.
Yeah, and
So that's
if this was Egypt too, we might say that that may be indicative of it being from an earlier period,
Mhm.
parts of it at least, because we know the Olmec, they
Right.
were considered the mother civilization, the oldest
Mhm.
civilization we know of in Egypt. So if they're the only, these heads, if that's one of the only other examples of real megaliths there. It could be saying that Mitla, parts of it at least go back to that earlier time, possibly, or a different culture. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I will get there in just a moment. Because to me, the second important aspect of the Mitla, which connects again to all these traditions about civilizing gods like Quetzalcoatl, who came in ancient times and brought the gifts of civilization or agriculture, is that Mitla was right at the center of that agricultural revolution. Mitla is the first site in Mexico where evidence of crop domestication has been found. In Mitla, we have the earliest evidence in the entire American continent of crop domestication, almost 10,000 years ago. There are several caves in the mountains right behind Mitla. One of those caves is called Gilanakish, that provided the earliest evidence for the domestication of squash and corn, which are some of the staples of the ancient Mesoamerican diet. We're talking about a time between 10,000 and 8,000 years ago, so at the very beginning of this agricultural revolution that also began in the Near East and in many other parts of the world. So I find it fascinating that you have this association between megalithic architecture at a site like Mitla, the very beginnings of agriculture in Mesoamerica, and also many traditions that tie and connect Mitla with Quetzalcoatl. There is this idea that Quetzalcoatl, prior to his departure, built the subterranean chambers at Mitla and likely stored artifacts, maybe even writings or
Wow.
knowledge in those subterranean chambers. So something that again connects to your point, to this idea of a lost hall of records, like you may have at Giza and other places around the world. The idea that Mitla may be the location of a sort of Mesoamerican hall of record where these civilizing gods not only created those great structures and in a way jump started Mesoamerican civilization 8,000, 10,000 years ago, perhaps, but they may have built there a repository of knowledge of civilization as a legacy for future generations. So that's what brought me to Mitla in the first place. It's a site that also has very close connections to the underworld. The name of the site, Mitla, comes from the Nahua language, from the word Mictlan, which means underworld. And it was literally considered to be an entrance to the underworld. For the Aztecs, for the Zapotecs, before them, Mitla was a sacred site. It was the place where the deities of the underworld lived. It was the cemetery of generations of their kings and high priests. It was believed that the entire site had been built on top of a gigantic cave system, which is what the Zapotecs referred to as Lyobaa, the Aztecs as Mictlan, which was considered to be a literal entrance into these underworld, into this subterranean cavernous space. And that's what the project that my team and I started now almost 4 years ago wanted to discover, wanted to understand by deploying the latest, most state of the art geophysical methods to prove the existence of these subterranean labyrinths under Mitla, which is described in colonial sources, but whose entrances became lost over the last few centuries and since colonial times, when allegedly all accesses were blocked by the Spanish priests and by the Inquisition. So that's the start of my personal quest and my research into Mitla. And so, if you don't mind, I will just share here a few slides, if you will, just enable me.
Yeah, sure. I would say also thank you for explaining what you just said, because I was going to ask you specifically if there were legends tying it to a record hall, to a chamber, because this is my whole thing is, I do believe there is a repository of knowledge under Giza and some of these other sites in Egypt and almost everywhere where these things where you have this civilization coming into bring the core building blocks of civilization in every one of those areas around the world. You actually have these record halls, repositories, and they are always associated with the underground spaces. So it would just fit the pattern if it was, but I'm glad you mentioned that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why I started this foundation. It's called the Arts Project back in 2021 with a few likely minded researchers and individuals in an attempt to investigate the question of the origins of Mesoamerican civilization. It also invest and fund archaeological expeditions, research projects throughout Mexico and Mesoamerica, searching for the origins of Mesoamerican civilization and deploying the latest technologies in terms of remote sensing, ground prospection applied to the study of the ancient past. So that's in a nutshell the mission of this foundation of the ARCS project. And Mitla was our first project. We have now completed 2 research seasons at Mitla, working in partnership with the Mexican National Institute of History and Anthropology in the National Autonomous University of Mexico to provide scientific coordination for the project. Let me just say before we begin that this project has been conducted with the utmost scientific guidelines and guardrails. In no way my own personal views on what may be an ancient lost civilization have influenced the design or the realization of this project. This is a scientific endeavor. We don't know what we may find under Mitla, and I hope that this will be something that will change our view of the origins of a civilization. But I just want to be very clear here that this is a scientific initiative partnering with major academic research institutions, and whatever my own personal views on the possibility of an ancient lost civilizations may be, they did not in any way influence the development or the realization of this project. Now, what you
Yeah.
have here are just some headlines from the international press, some academic articles that covered our research at Mitla over the past couple of years or so. We had several articles from the likes of Smithsonian Magazine, the New York Times, Life Science, covering our discoveries at Mitla. What we discovered is essentially exactly what ancient traditions and colonial accounts claimed, which is the existence of a vast network of underground chambers and passages deep beneath the site of Mitla. The methodologies that we employed included three different geophysical methods. We use a combination of a ground-penetrating radar, electric resistivity tomography, and seismic tomography. The reason why we chose these different methods is that they have their own advantages, their own limitations, but they very well complement each other. You always want to have a sort of sounding board or to be able to validate the results of one method with a different method. What was remarkable about this research is that all these three methods essentially pointed to the same results, to the same findings, which is, once again, the existence of a vast underground labyrinth, a whole network of subterranean chambers and tunnels deep underneath the site. The starting point of much of these research were some colonial accounts. You can see here some pictures of the Church of Mitla. This is the Church of San Pablo Apostol, which, as you can see here, was built directly on top of some Zapotec ruins. You can see here one of the head archaeologists at the site pointing the direction of a huge monolithic lintel. This is about 4 meters long. This is by no means one of the largest blocks at Mitla. There are some stones that are up to 7 meters long. They weigh over 50 tons. But it gives you a sense of the megalithic architecture that you find at the site and of how the Spanish, particularly the Catholic Church, they built on top of the earlier Zapotec structures. So literally incorporating them in the construction of these Catholic Church. Now, we were able to find an early colonial account by Father Francisco de Burgoa, who was the General Inquisitor of Oaxaca in the 1600s, and he left a very detailed account of the early explorations of Mitla and what the first Catholic Spanish missionaries found when they arrived at Mitla. Let me start by saying that Mitla was probably one of the sites that most impressed the Spanish conquistadors when they came to Mexico. There are many very vivid descriptions of the site of Mitla, of the ruins of Mitla. They were left by Spanish travelers, by Spanish conquistadors. But what really interested us was one specific account by this Dominican father, Francisco de Burgoa, in which he describes the discovery of an underground temple and a set of tunnels and subterranean chambers underneath the site. What Burgoa relates is the existence of a set of 4 interconnected chambers located under what he calls the Palace of the Living and the Dead, which was likely the most important Zapotec temple at the site. And these 4 chambers, according to Burgoa, served as the tombs for generations of high priests and kings of the Zapotec country. But then the last chamber, which Burgoa describes, was probably the most interesting because it provided access to what Burgoa describes as a huge cavern, which and the Zapotecs consider to be an entrance to Lyobaa, the underworld. Burgoa says that this cavern extended for many leagues, many miles under the ground. And it's very interesting from the description that Burgoa gives of this cavern. He speaks of several intersecting passages like the streets of a city. That's what he says. He describes huge columns supporting the roof of this cavern, all of which in a way suggest that this may have been, if not an artificial space, at least an artificially modified space. He described this huge labyrinth in which people would get lost and how these Spanish priests went down into this labyrinth with torches. There is this dramatic depiction of these priests and soldiers going down to this underground labyrinth, walking past the mummies of generations of high priests and kings still covered in gold and all of their traditional weapons and insignia, and then walking into this damp, dark cavern. There is one passage in Borga's account in which he says that they used a rope to try to find their way into this confusing labyrinth, and that they encounter a very strong wind that almost blew out their torches, so that in the end they abandoned the exploration of these underground labyrinth, and they decided, according to Bourgois, to completely seal off all the entrances to the site. So now we have reason
Wow.
to believe that the Church of Mitla, the one you see here in these pictures, was built exactly on top of the palace that was described by Bourgois, and on top of the entrance to these underground labyrinth. If you think about that, what best place to build a church than on top of what used to be the most important Zapotec temple at the site? If you
Yeah.
want to conceal something forever, what best way again of building a church so you would be absolutely sure that nobody ever again would go there and excavate or open it up again? And that's
Yeah.
until now, when we used those geophysical methods to literally see underneath the church. Now, for a number of reasons, it's not possible to conduct direct excavations at Mitla or under the church. There are a number of structures. There is the church itself that did not grant permission for these excavations to be conducted on church ground. But with these geophysical methods, what we're able to do was essentially see under the ground, see what lies under the church and under all the main structures in Mitla. Here you see a snapshot from one of the seismic scans. It was done at a frequency of 4.76 hertz. And what it shows in blue are areas of low density or low seismic velocity, which are most likely voids. You can see here at least four different voids. There are probably more here that appear to be connected. There is one very large void here in the area of the main altar of the church. Once again, if you think about that, that would be probably the most obvious location where we will be looking for the entrance to the underground labyrinth, placed right underneath the altar, as if to even like symbolize the conquest, like Christianity
Yeah.
conquering the old religion in a way.
That
And
that's
here
kind of
you
a
can
that
clearly see this void,
mhm.
but these are other potential voids here to the right down below that all appear to be somehow connected. It's as if we're looking here at the depth of between 12 and 15 meters below the ground. It's as if there was completely honeycomb, as if you have a whole network of caves, tunnels running possibly for miles underneath the entire site.
Mhm.
Now, what I'm going to show you here are some 3D scans. So these are essentially slices that were cut vertically of the ground compared to the previous picture, which is more of a 2D scan. What you can see here is a cut, a slice going down to a depth of 18 meters. So we're talking about roughly 60 feet below ground. Here you can see how these voids, how these cavities appear to connect to even deeper layers. There are at least two levels here. There is a one level which is located at depth of between 3 and 5 meters, almost directly underneath the church, where you can see here what appears to be a direct communication with the altar. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. And then you have what looks like another vertical shaft that connects with a deeper level, which goes down to a depth of 18 meters. And that's at least as far as our instruments could penetrate. But it's very likely that that continues in an easterly direction, possibly reaching even greater depths. There may even be further levels under the ground, which we have not reached yet. You can see here also some very clearly defined horizontal passages that appear to be some tunnels, probably located at a depth of between 2 and 3 meters below ground, that may or may not connect with these larger underground chambers. Why I pointed at this entrance under the main altar is because there are many accounts in Mitla from relatively recent times of people actually having entered these underground labyrinth. There is a story that was told to us. It was also told to the New York Times when one of the journalists came to the site to interview us and to interview some of the local people about the fact that this entrance under the altar was accidentally uncovered a few decades ago. It was probably sometime in the 1980s when the floor of the church was completely redone. And according to many local people, that's when this entrance was again rediscovered. Many people went in. There are tales of people getting lost in those subterranean chambers, never coming back. And that's what prompted the church authorities to seal that entrance once again. But for many years, that entrance under the altar remained open. According to most accounts, there was only a wooden trapdoor located right under the altar that provided access to these
Wow.
subterranean chambers. And many people actually claim to have been down there, to have seen those massive stone chambers. The decorations on the
Hmm.
walls would be described as carvings, as geometric
Wow.
figures that they saw on the walls in these labyrinth
Hmm.
of passages extending under the ground. So
So
that's again what we have
some people
rediscovered.
there are some people who are still alive today, you mean, who have seen him?
Yes,
Wow.
much alive, very much alive, and very willing to
Amazing.
tell a story. There is a one person who is a very good friend. He owns one of the best restaurants in Mitla, actually, right by the church. And he told us this story. He's probably around like 50 years old right now. When he was a kid, he went down. The priest actually allowed him and his brother to go down into the chamber, just warning them to not go beyond the first subterranean chamber. He has very vivid memories of just this feeling of going down to this like subterranean space in the complete darkness, these like large, huge chambers under the ground, and of him like touching the stone on the walls and realizing that it was an ancient space that had been sealed off for centuries.
Wow.
So this tradition is very much alive in Mitla. There are many accounts of secret entrances, subterranean passages all over the town that many people today may still have knowledge of. By the way, it's very likely there are other entrances to this underground labyrinth beyond the one in the church. This is the one that is probably the most famous and the one that we have presently confirmed through geophysical methods. But part of the research we have conducted and in later seasons also focus on the other groups of structures, trying to identify potential entrances or potential connections to these underground chambers. What we found is that these subterranean network extends pretty much underneath the entire site. It's not only limited to the church, there are probably miles of tunnels and subterranean chambers all underground under the site of Mitla.
Yeah, that's also I was gonna say it reminds me of looking back to other cultures like Giza or to Egypt and stuff. Usually when you have these underground labyrinths in cities, they do have these long range connections going out, and so I wonder if it's connected all underneath Oaxaca. This is on the outskirts of Oaxaca City.
Yes. Well,
Could be connected to
there
other
is
sites.
the I'm also gonna go there. So when Gurugua described this as subterranean labyrinth, obviously, he never explored it himself, and clearly from his description, these Spanish priests and soldiers that went down only were only able to explore a very small part of that subterranean labyrinth. But probably based on local accounts, he claims that those tunnels extend as far as Monte Alban, which is a very important archaeological site close to Oaxaca City, which is about 50, 60 kilometers away. Now, that may be an exaggeration, but that at least tells us that there was a belief among the local people, among the local
Yeah.
Zapotec people, that these tunnels were very extensive and probably extended for miles around Mitla.
That's what I was going to ask you too, is if maybe it's connected to Monte Alban, the White Mountain. That's actually one of my favorite places I've ever been in the whole world ever. And Monte Alban is mind-blowingly beautiful. I mean,
It is. It is.
this huge, huge temple complex on top of the whole peak of a mountain that's overlooking the whole city. It's just one of the most, I sometimes call it the Machu Picchu of Mexico.
Mhm. Beautiful sight. Beautiful
Yeah.
sight. So here you have some more of the scans. You have some 3D views as well. There are different cuts that show some other portions of the tunnel system underneath the church where there are potentially additional chambers that all appear to be interconnected, now reaching down to very great depths of almost 50 to 60 feet under the ground. And then you have some tunnels that appear to be a lot shallower. These are probably only 2, 3 meters under the ground. It's interesting how they intersect in a grid-like manner. You see these tunnels that run apparently straight in a horizontal way. You have more passages that intersect them almost perpendicular. And that's a pattern we have found throughout the entire site. We'll see it in a moment with some of the scans that we conducted at the other groups of structure. And you find a very similar pattern of tunnels intersecting. It's almost like a checkerboard of tunnels. And this is only the most superficial level because we've seen there is an even deeper level which can go down to up to 50, 60 feet. And that's only as far as our instruments could penetrate under the ground. Now, this is a different methodology. Here we employed a ground-penetrating radar in another structure at MITLA. This is the palace of the columns. You can see a picture here. This is probably the most famous structure at MITLA, by far the best preserved. It's a very interesting structure. It has this odd T shape, which is going to be significant when we talk about another site, San Miguel Ixtapan, where this inverted T shape is very closely associated to the concept of the underworld. It represents, in a way, an entrance to the underworld. What we did here was to use a ground penetrating radar on the platform of the site to see if this massive structure, which is also megalithic, was likely built on top of some earlier structure. And what we found here, and you can see here those parallel lines, is evidence of an earlier stairway. So you can see the present stairway here, which was built sometime in the Zapotec, in the late Zapotec period, around 800 to 1,000 years ago. But then you have evidence of an earlier stairway inside the structure that may be significantly older. So that again suggests that the origins of Mitla as a ceremonial center may be much older than the Zapotec period. And you have evidence here of multiple stages of construction. That's something you find at so many archaeological sites in Mexico and Mesoamerica. They were continuously built over. So even though the structure you see right now in Mitla, they're not technically that old. The most some of the earliest excavated structures at Mitla, they go back at most of 1,500, 2,000 years ago. But then there is evidence that the site was continuously rebuilt over many, many thousands of years, possibly since the end of the last ice age, where we have evidence of crop domestication. We have cave paintings at Mitla dating back to 8,000, 10,000 years ago.
Mhm.
Now, this is an overview of the entire site. We have now mostly looked at the church group here, which is the area around the church, the columns group. But Mitla is in fact composed of several different groups of ancient structures. You have what is called the Calvario group, the Arroyo group, the South group. These are not probably from for most visitors, they are not nearly as impressive as the other groups of structures. They're in a much more dilapidated state. But from an archaeological point of view, that tells us these are probably some of the earliest groups of structure at Mitla. So they're probably even more interesting. The Calvario group in particular is a huge pyramid, which has now partially been built over. There is actually a church, a small chapel. You can see it here in this image. It was built on top of it in colonial times. And everywhere you see evidence of megalithic stonework, a very large, precisely fitting megalithic stone blocks. So in the second season of the project in 2023, we also wanted to see underneath some of these other groups of structure to see how far those tunnels that we had identified under the church, under the columns group could potentially extend underneath the site. This is a scan from the Adobe group, which is right next to the Calvario pyramid. You can see here in the 3D image how you also have a set of chambers. This one, particularly the one with the letter A, seems like very clearly marked here. That's a chamber that will measure around 5 meters across. There is clearly what looks like here a connecting tunnel, and two more chambers here with the letters B and C that also appear to connect. And again, you have this idea of chambers that connect underground with tunnels, and these sort of grid-like pattern where you have tunnels intersecting at right angles underground, which is very,
Yeah.
very unusual.
Yeah.
This is sorry. Before we move there. Just also one comment on the underground structures. I mean, like right now, archaeologists know of two subterranean chambers at Mitla, which are both located in the Columns group. These are some of the most impressive megalithic structures in all of Mesoamerica. These are some cruciform cross-shaped chambers with beautiful fretwork designs, huge monolithic lintels, columns. So these give you a sense of what we may expect to find underground in these other chambers. Now, the next step for Mitla, now that we have identified and confirmed with geophysical methods the presence of huge underground cavities, would be to drill down into these chambers to see what is there. So that would be a future season for the Mitla project. We're currently working to get the permits from the National Institute of History and Anthropology to conduct some prospective drilling into the site. The idea is to use minimally invasive drilling equipment to drill a small hole into some of these chambers, enough to insert a camera or a laser scanner, which should give us a much better idea of the extent of these chambers and their possible contents as well. But our
Yeah.
general impression is that this is part of a much more extensive underground labyrinth that may extend for miles all around Mitla and going down to a very great depth. I have this feeling that we have just barely scratched the surface here, but these can extend very similar to some of the underground cities you find in Turkey, for instance, for many, many levels under the ground.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say too that one there, it looks like that one that's kind of square, number A, letter A. It also reminds me of things in Egypt and some of them where they're actually possibly originally natural caves that were amended to kind of be shaped into chambers. Or sometimes they were intentionally left more naturally, organically shaped because a lot of the times they have acoustic features that depend on, how they're shaped. If you have these perfectly square tunnels, it's a very different acoustic effect than so some of the uses for these chambers may have had to do with
Mhm.
them having a dampening effect rather than echo. But yeah, it looks like
Mhm.
some of the chambers I've seen in Egypt too.
Yeah. Well, one of the new avenues of research will actually be back in Mitla and in Teotitlán del Valle on the ground in just a few weeks. So at the end of June, we'll be conducting a new season of geophysical exploration, not in Mitla itself, but at a nearby site called Teotitlán del Valle. This is a very fascinating site. It's located only a few kilometers away from Mitla. There are very strong hints and many legends about possible subterranean connections with Mitla, this idea that it may be connected by underground tunnels to Mitla itself. And this is a very fascinating site because unlike Mitla, where you still have many well-preserved Zapotec structures and monuments, Teotihuacan was completely erased. It was completely leveled to the ground by the Spanish. There are only some fragments of stones. You can see many pictures here with these very unusual geometric designs, very precisely cut. These are some huge megalithic stone blocks you find all over the town, which clearly tell us there were some very important buildings, very important structures at Teotihuacan that were completely dismantled by the Spanish. The site itself, the name of the site Teotihuacan means the city of the gods or the place of the gods, which again is a very fascinating name for a site. There are many legends in Teotihuacan about the underworld, about subterranean chambers. Last year, we conducted an initial scan, which is what you see here. With the inverted colors, it's not very clear, but you can tell here in this like lighter blue that there are probably tunnels or chambers underneath the side. There are many traditions in Teotihuacan about a river disappearing underground. So it's a very promising new avenue of research. Will be kicking off these new project in just a few weeks from now. And if you allow me, we have also started a fundraiser for this project, same as the Mitla project, Project Lyobaa. All of these has been funded through the generosity of hundreds of donors who have supported this research with their donations. We're also seeking for additional funding now for Teotihuacan. This project is only presently 20% funded, so we still have a long way to go before we can reach our funding goal. And by supporting our research, we're also ensuring that whatever findings, whatever results come out of this research are going to be made available to the public. We want to make sure that all this information is freely accessible, that these results, the same way as we did for the Mitla project, they get very broad diffusion. The public has access to all the data because we think that these has the potential of quite literally rewriting the history of civilization, at least in this part of the world. And this is meaningful research that needs to get and to reach the public and as
Yeah.
many people as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Give me the link to where we can send people to help contribute to it. And
Absolutely.
we have a couple people talking to us about coming forward with some bigger funding for the Egyptian stuff, but I'm trying to get everyone who's interested in that to pay attention also to this and some of the other sites around the world. So happily send some more people there. It's awesome that you're crowdfunding it because I absolutely believe, like you say, this is something that could transform our whole view of history, and it could benefit the whole world, really. So amazing. Yeah, we'll share the link.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mhm.
And then finally, I'm gonna switch to a different project, which I find extremely fascinating. Whole different area of Mexico. This is an archaeological site called San Miguel Ixtapan, where our foundation, the Arts Project, has been active since at least 2023 with several rescue missions and documentation projects. This is, I think, one of the most mysterious sites I've ever encountered in Mexico. There is almost no information at all on this site. It's located up, just give you a sense, you can see here from the map, located about 4.5 hours away from Mexico City in the mountainous region to the southwest of Mexico. And there is virtually no documentation, no information on this site. The only published paper is a very interesting article by Charles Wiki and Modi Bullington in 1960 called A Possible Andean Influence in Central Mexico. Very interestingly, these two American archaeologists, they stumbled on the site of San Miguel Ixtapan almost by chance, and they reported back on these impressive megalithic stonework that they found at the site, which is unlike anything else from Mesoamerica. If you look at some of the pictures here, you have these beautifully carved, very polished stone slabs with very precise carvings, right angles, which are unlike anything else from Mesoamerica. There is nothing like this in Mesoamerica, but they bear a very strong resemblance to art styles and megalithic architecture from Peru, from Bolivia. Think about places like Ollantaytambo, Ñaupa
Yeah.
Iglesia, Tiwanaku as well. So it's something
Pumapunku.
completely unique. I've never seen anything like this in Mexico before. There are literally dozens of these megalithic stone slabs scattered around the site, some almost entirely intact, as this one, which you see in one of the walls of the local church. Some other ones that have been broken, some that are constantly being uncovered and being found throughout the site. So there is this idea that the village of San Miguel Ixtapa, this little town in southwestern Mexico state, was built on top of this huge megalithic site that still lies buried deep underground. It has these exceptionally sophisticated megalithic architecture. You find absolutely stunning artifacts like these polished basalt column. You can see here in the image, you have 3D scans, 3D models of all these different artifacts. Here you see some of the recent work we have conducted at the site. This was a huge stone slab that was found abandoned at a ranch just a few miles from the main site of San Miguel Ixtapan. The ARCS project, in partnership obviously with the Secretary of Culture and the National Institute of History and Anthropology, the lead archaeologist of the site, Victor Osorio, we put together a proposal for actually removing this slab, which was exposed to risk of looting and vandalism, and move it to the local site museum of San Miguel Ixtapa. As you can see here, we had to use heavy equipment. Each one of the fragments weighed over 5 tons. So it was a major logistic endeavor to move that to the
Wow.
local site museum.
Do you
And
know what
you can
kind
see
of
here some images.
do you know what kind of stone those are? The ones with the insect cuts?
Yes, it's basalt. It's
It's all
basalt, but
basalt?
some of the
Oh
stones
wow.
are basalt. So it's a very hard stone, and to
Yeah.
be able to cut these very precise right angles, as you see here, in a
Mhm.
stone as hard as basalt or
Yeah.
andesite, is a pretty
I
remarkable achievement. I'm going to tell you a funny
yeah.
story. When these two archaeologists I was just mentioning, Charles Wiki and Modi Bullington, they first came to the site, they published this article that caused quite a stir in the archaeological community, which they claimed that this is the work of some unknown civilization that possibly had ties with South America. And immediately the archaeological establishment, they jumped on them, calling them completely crazy and lunatics. And the main argument from the Mexican archaeologists of the time was that clearly these artifact, these slabs, in order to carve those very precise right angles, geometric shapes, you need metal tools. So you probably need steel tools to do that, to create these very planar
Yeah.
flat surfaces. And so the mainstream consensus was that these were colonial artifacts. So these were manufactured sometimes during the colonial period, likely as part of some church building or some other modern construction, and clearly were a product of Spanish colonial stonemasons.
Did the
This
Spanish do
was
that
the
though?
mainstream. Well, that was the mainstream view for many, many
Yeah.
decades until in the late 1990s, an excavation was conducted inside the main pyramid of San Miguel Ixtapan. And lo and behold, they pierced through a sealed chamber inside the main pyramid that contained two of these stone slabs still in their original position. Now, that was carbon dated to 700 AD. This is still relatively late, but this only tells us when the slabs were buried. We have no idea how old these slabs, this megalithic
Right.
architecture we find here at the site could be. There is clear evidence of reuse. So the builders of this pyramid at San Miguel Ixtapan, they most likely found some of these stone slabs and they buried them within this chamber, which is a sort of cache inside the main pyramid with many other artifacts, some of which were thousands of years old. So this only tells us that these slabs were already ancient in 700 AD, 1,300 years ago, but we don't know how much older than that. This could well be thousands of years old. This could date back to the pre-classic period, to the time of the Olmecs, maybe even earlier than that. We don't know. What I can tell you now is that some excavations that were conducted on another mound at San Miguel Ixtapan, closely associated to some of the monumental architecture and to a very curious jade pendant, a very Olmec style jade pendant that was found at San Miguel Ixtapan. That was dated, it was carbon dated to 1500 BC. So we're talking about 3,500 years ago, even
Wow.
earlier than some of the Gulf Coast Olmec sites. And again, we're barely scratching the surface here. We're talking about a tomb that was found on top of one of the mounds at the site, but we don't know what may still lie buried underground. My feeling with San Miguel Ixtapan is very much like Tiwanaku. You know, when the first archaeologists came to Tiwanaku in Bolivia, Arthur Poznansky in the 1940s, they found pretty much no visible architecture at the site. Everything was so deeply buried. It took decades of
Yeah.
excavations to uncover all these structures. So the sense here is
Yeah.
that there may be a whole megalithic site, a whole megalithic city buried deep underground at San Miguel Ixtapan. And these labs are just part of these deeper layer that were somehow reused or repurposed in later times. We also
Wow.
found evidence of a megalithic. Here you can get a sense of the size of some of these stones here on the left-hand side. This was during an
Yeah.
exploration along a river called the Akiagua River, which we conducted in 2024. There are several videos. If you go to the Arts Project YouTube channel, we'll find several videos of our explorations around the area. This is a massive stone block. Uh, it probably measures 3 by 3 meters, weighing in the range of 15 tons, one of the largest that we found at the site in this area that likely served as a basalt quarry. And then on the right-hand side, you can see one of the most recent discoveries. This is a stone slab that was found in 2025, just the beginning of this year, at a site called Pinsar Morale. You can see here these very peculiar geometric carvings. And again, you have
Yeah.
this inverted T-shape. You can only see part of that, very much like at Mitla. You have in the shape of the main structure this inverted T-shape, which is generally associated with the underworld. It generally symbolizes an entrance to the
Mhm.
underworld, sort of man-made cave, a man-made tunnel. And so again, you have this very strange connection between these two sites, very far apart, between Mitla, San Miguel Ixtapan, the same style of architecture, these same geometric shapes. And this is a site
Yeah.
I'm very excited to continue exploring. We currently have a research proposal that
Hmm.
we are now putting together to conduct a much more extensive exploration of this site. We plan on deploying LiDAR to conduct a complete mapping of the site. We plan on conducting petrographic analysis to understand more about the stone composition, about the provenance of the stone, the basalt or andesite, using also understanding more about the carving techniques. There are now methods of mass spectrometry that can detect even traces of 1 part per million of whatever tools were used. So imagine if we could demonstrate that metal tools were used based on the residual traces still present on the stone. That would
Wow.
be revolutionary. There would be a
Yeah.
complete game changer for our understanding of Mesoamerican civilization, obviously conducting
Mhm.
more of those radiocarbon tests,
Yeah.
radiocarbon dates to to understand just how old this site is. But these could very well be one of the earliest and certainly one of the most sophisticated sites in Mesoamerica. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
remind this name, San Miguel Ixtapan. It may not tell you much, but believe me, this is going to be one of the most important sites in Mesoamerica. This can very well become the Mesoamerican Göbekli Tepe as we continue researching and excavating this site.
Yeah, I have not seen stuff that looks like that before in Mexico. And sometimes there's inset corners like that, like double ones especially. It almost seems like they're showing off that they have a method of shaping the
Yeah,
stone in some way. because why there's no functional reason for that. This must be a symbolic, or it must be an important shape, and it must be
Yes.
something that was easy for them to do, or at least not extremely difficult based on the methods they had, because why would you, spend a year ch chiseling perfectly this smooth surface? You
Mm.
can't make these inset corners with a saw blade. In Egypt, there's some places where we can see they must have used these giant circular saws or something like it's circular saws specifically based on the grain in some points. But you can slice big, perfectly square stones, but you can't do inset cuts like
Yeah.
that.
It's quite literally beyond comprehension. And again, there is nothing like this anywhere in Mesoamerica. It's completely different from anything
Yeah,
you find in the area. Most of the architecture, at least like the architecture you see above ground at the site, which belongs to a much later period, is relatively simple. You have, as you find at many Mesoamerican sites, architecture which mostly consists of smaller stones cemented together, adobe, but this is completely different. This is a whole different civilization that
yeah,
created these objects. And as I said, there are dozens of these just lying around in the
it's
fields and around
amazing.
this site. It is not a
It's
site that is on any archaeological map. Now, another
wow.
artifact, and we'll see that on the video that I have on my YouTube channel, the Arcs Project YouTube channel, about San Miguel Ixtapan, is a stone model of a city. So archaeologists back in the 1980s and 1990s, this was actually the first artifact found at the site. They uncovered a huge stone model which measures over 3 meters by 2. It's a massive basalt boulder with a representation of a whole city that includes pyramids, includes stairways, plazas, ball courts. Nobody has any idea what site is depicted. It could be a city that still lies buried there at the site of
Wow.
San Miguel Ixtapan. It would be one of the largest ceremonial center, one of the largest sites, just based on the scale. If the model is an accurate representation, that can very likely be one of the most important archaeological discoveries in Mesoamerica in decades, perhaps ever. So that's why
Wow.
I'm so excited about this site. I go there
Mhm.
regularly, at least once a month.
Cool.
Always happy to report back on any new findings from San Miguel Ixtapan. And as I said, we now
Awesome.
hope that we can get enough interest and funding to conduct a large-scale excavation and exploration of this site.
Yeah, it sounds like the Puma Punku of Mexico. So we'll have to get the Coffer Project as well, see if they can scan a little deeper there too, once they're done with
That would be
Giza.
fantastic. That
We'll
would
get
be
them on it.
fantastic. I would love we could apply some of those SAR scans, sites like Teotihuacan, for instance, where you have those massive
Teotihuacan,
pyramids as well.
San Miguel Ixtapan, Mitla, and yeah, start with some of those. There's also Piedras
But
Negras on the border in Guatemala is one that I really want to get to soon, but those might be, yeah, this one is new to me. I mean, this is amazing. These stones here, I have never seen anything like this in Mexico either. But I've never
yeah.
seen this at
Well, you're
all
very
until
welcome
just
to
now.
come down here to Mexico City. I was recently in San Miguel Ixtapan with Hugh Newman from Megalithomania. It's pretty also another friend of yours. I took him to the site. He was totally mind blown by what he saw there. He's currently working on a video on the site, so stay
Awesome.
tuned.
Yeah, well, I think
And
I'm gonna try and come down for a couple weeks at least if I can this year. Possibly when you're working at that other site you were saying in Oaxaca.
mhm.
Um, but I'll try and organize it with you because I want to go at least from Mexico City over to Guatemala, that stretch, and San Miguel Ixtapan. I would love to see that too. That looks
That would
amazing.
be fantastic.
We'll have
That
to
would be
arrange
fantastic.
it.
And just
Yeah, maybe.
to close here a bit more on the activities of the ARCS project of the foundation, we are also as part of our effort to make all of these accessible to the broader public, also creating a virtual museum of artifacts. Here we have some shots from our 3D scans of some of the most important Mesoamerican artifacts. We have a full library of 3D models with thousands of pictures maps, articles are all available on our website on arcsproject.org. You can find that we have a full research library, digital content library. So I really invite you and your listeners to visit us. Here you have the link to our website, arcsproject.org, where you're going to find a lot more pictures and information about our project. You're going to find there the full research report from the Mitla project and San Miguel Istapan. I also invite you to follow us on our social media. We have a Patreon page if you want to chip in and support the research. We have a Facebook page. We have a YouTube channel, Arcs Project MX, where we constantly post new videos about our discoveries, about our expeditions in ancient Mexico. So if you want to support and be part of this research, you can do that.
Awesome. Yeah, that is great. That's perfect. And yeah, I was going to ask you where can we send people, but I'll put all these links in the description below. And yeah, there's one film you put on YouTube about the Meatla project that's fantastic. I just rewatched last night in preparation for this because it's
Thank you.
so good. But you put such a good I don't know, half hour, 40-minute video on all that stuff. Really well done stuff. That actually, could you put that last picture up again one more time?
Yeah,
Because I just
absolutely.
wanted to ask you about the there's these motifs all over at Meatla, these beautiful complex
Oh,
stone
yeah.
motifs.
Yes.
Um yeah, that you
Sort of
can see
like
in this picture,
look like a QR code.
like a QR
Yeah.
code. Yeah,
Yeah. Sort of
or
like the QR codes.
I mean, there's something about Meatla that's there's this element of it that to me really speaks of it's
Mhm.
somewhat psychedelic, if you want to say that. It's somewhat transcendental. These
Mm.
patterns, they're like patterns you would see on a trip or when
Mhm.
you're taking some of these psychedelic. I know there's a lot of cactuses around here. This is also mezcal country. This is where
Mhm.
you have all the mezcal comes
Yes.
from, which is like a cactus used to make a whiskey-like kind of drink or a tequila-like drink, I would say. Um, but there are some other, I think, uh, I don't know, plants in that area potentially could have been connected with this. When I see some of these motifs here also look almost like Minoan or Greek, like some of the
Mhm.
patterns, they have these spirals and things, but there's so many different ones and they're each made from
So many. So
hundreds
many.
of different stones. Every pattern is different.
Yes.
This is amazing. So do you think this is I think it ties in with the initiation processes of where
It
you're
does. It does
going
for sure.
down to
For sure.
experience your own death. Yeah, you think it's tied to that?
For sure. Keep in mind that these are sites, very much like in Egypt, in other parts of the world, that were constantly reused, constantly reoccupied by later generations. So even though at a site like Mitla, we find subterranean chambers that were used as tombs by the Zapotecs, we don't know what their original function was. I like to think of Mitla in a way also as a place of initiation, very much like Chavin de Huantar in Peru, where you have
Mhm.
this temple, you have these underground tunnels. There is very strong evidence, actually, in the Wantara of the use of hallucinogenic substances. So you can imagine like people under the influence of these powerful hallucinogens wandering around these subterranean chambers or living these initiation experiences in these chambers under the ground, having visions maybe that then they reproduced in the patterns you see here in Mitla, for instance. I also believe that these were not just ornamental. There is a sort of language here. To your point, they are all different. Something I find it very interesting is that some of the later fretworks are built of these tiny, small stones. So these are almost mosaics, but the earliest ones are entirely monolithic. They were carved directly from the rock. And because you have all these different symbols, you have squares, you have all these like fretwork patterns, symbols that look almost like waves, labyrinths, swastikas in some cases, and so on. I do believe that here we are confronted with some form of language or symbolic expression. At least that
Yeah.
these were not just decorative patterns, but there was a specific meaning attached to them.
Yeah, like that one in the middle there up at the top. It looks very much like, for instance, the Chicana, a symbol in
Mhm.
Peru, where
Yes.
which has this square, and which is, I think, related to the four directions and the sun. It's a very profoundly important religious mystical symbol. And yeah, some of these I think probably have implications based on you could read certain things out of them, or they would just help put you into this state of mind that enhances your
Mhm.
ability to access other states of consciousness once you're down there. But yeah, that was my next question I was going to ask is you think it's much like Chave de Huantar, which I've been
Mhm.
there as well, quick. And got to go into some of those tunnels as well. And some of them even didn't have lights on at the time, so I got to experience the actual being. It's like I've said before in other interviews, is that I think the initiation is generally an imitation of death. It's a simulation
Yeah.
of death and experiencing what you are outside your body and outside your senses. And so you actually have to
Yeah.
go through that. The same as Greece too. The Greek mysteries, the Eleusinian and Orphic mysteries and things. You would
Yeah.
take the soma you
You
would
find
drink
it
and then go down.
right, and you find it at many Maya sites as well. There are
Mm.
several sites in Chiapas in the Yucatan region. There is where you find underground labyrinths. They were specifically built with no clear purpose in mind. You have one very beautiful labyrinth at Yaxchilan, which is a wonderful Maya site not far from Piedras Negras, actually, but still on the Mexican side. I have a video up on my channel in which I talk about this subterranean labyrinth of Yaxchilan, which is like a very confusing set of chambers and passages with no clear function. But again, gave me this impression, very similar impression to the tunnels underneath Chavin de Huantar, that it may have been used as part of some initiation ceremonies. You have very similar labyrinth also at the important Maya site of Tonina in Chiapas, at Oxquintoc, which is another important site in Yucatan, actually in the Puc region. And archaeologists are greatly puzzled as to the meaning, as to the function of these labyrinths. Perhaps because they don't really understand this component about psychedelic journeys, about initiation ceremonies. There is a much deeper esoteric component. They tend to think about these spaces in functional terms, as whether they were like storerooms or they were tombs. But to me, it's very clear that they had some important symbolic function, probably as part of some initiation ceremony.
Yeah. Yeah, I see in most of these cultures that it has an element that relates to that it's usable as an initiation ritual tool. That a lot of times there are tombs mixed in, whether that was from a different era or being reused, but sometimes there are important people buried in them. And another, in most all these cases as well, is an element of a library or an archive, repository, storage spaces. So any of the three of those, or all of them, are amazing reasons to pursue looking into this deeper, whether it's drilling down and getting an endoscope camera in there, which would be amazing, or finding an entrance that we can get into one section and then take it from there, see how many other doors that opens up to. But I think you're laying the groundwork for the chance for us all to eventually see into these spaces. Hopefully, if we can get in there ourselves, or I've also been thinking about tethered drones in
Mhm.
Egypt, the stuff we're doing, because people are always like, oh, why don't you send a drone down there? And it's like, it's not going to go very far. It's going to lose signal immediately through the
Right,
rock.
right.
But they have tethered ones that you can keep a cord so it can go without a signal
You
to
can drill
some
down,
degree.
you can insert an endoscopic camera as well, at least
Yeah.
as a starter.
Yeah. maybe a tiny little drone or if you can get a
Mhm.
tiny tethered one to go through a hole. But it's so exciting. And I mean, you have opened the door for all of this for Mexico, which is, exactly like we're trying to do in Egypt, is show the scans that give us enough of an indication to see that there is something down there that is so exciting. If we can find a way to get in, we can't damage it, but do it as minimally invasive as possible. You've shown us there's something worth it down there, which is amazing. So, just the fact that you've done all this work to organize and bring together the right people for this, it's been a very scientifically rigorous protocols you're all following. And so, yeah, it's so exciting to me to see this all coming together. Maybe we can, I don't know, I hope we can travel a little bit together, maybe to go to a couple of these sites.
Hopefully so. We love to.
Maybe in a few months. Yeah. That would be so fun. I want to go back to Tula again too as well. We're hearing a lot of excavations going on there. But yeah, I think I want to thank you so much for sharing all of this because some of this stuff you just shared, I was not even aware of myself. And I'm so glad to get all the rest of it out to people who haven't seen it yet. So, yeah, I'm so grateful. And I think we can wrap it up. And I'll let you say a few more things if there's any, you already gave us the websites, but um,
Mhm.
we'll put all those links in the description. And I'll hand it to you to say anything else you want to add to wrap it up for today.
Well, just as I'm researching for my next book, I recently had the opportunity of visiting the Gulf Coast region and seeing and touching firsthand what is, I think, one of the most extraordinary artifacts that has ever been found in Mesoamerica. It's called the Cascajal tablet, which is considered to be the earliest writing in the American continent. It's a tablet
Wow.
at least 3,000 years old, covered in a completely unknown script, which was found just a few years ago. It's been seen by very few researchers so far. That still tells you about the fact that we know very little still about the origins of Mesoamerican civilization. There is still so much that we do not know. There are so many areas of Mesoamerica, including entire states in Mexico. I think about much of the state of Guerrero, where for different reasons it's very hard to conduct archaeological research, which remain as essentially blank spots on the archaeological map. So we know probably only a very, very small percentage still, not only of Mesoamerican history, but of the history of civilization. There is still so much that we can uncover, and they do believe that new technologies like what we have been employing here in Mexico with these geophysical prospection methods, SAR in Egypt can help reveal so much about the ancient past. And you need very often to have individuals that are committed to these, such as yourself, such as Filippo Biondi, Coro Malanga, like all the team, like people who are like generally interested in revealing and uncovering more about the ancient past. We also need to support these research. These are all grassroots efforts. In our case, it's entirely self-funded or through donors who have been helping and supporting your research. But if we want for this to continue, if we want to really change the paradigm, we need more people to support, to contribute to these research. And I think that all together we can really make the difference and really help to shift the paradigm in archaeology and bring forth a new understanding of the origins of civilization.
Yes, 100% with you on that. Yeah, we'll see if we can get some of these people talking about funding our stuff in Egypt to look at Mexico as well. We'll see if we can get I'm gonna write up actually a whole thing for Filippo and Armando Corrado to give them my top picks about several of these places that I think after we get done with Giza, which they're expecting will take till the end of this year at least, just doing Giza. But I can give them specific coordinates, so we could talk about that later too. If you can give me like specific coordinates, boxing in certain areas you want to check.
Absolutely.
we'll get them a list and just be like, whenever you can get to it. But I'm sure they'd be interested. And yeah, they can look down. You're seeing it, Meatla, you're saying is 18 meters max. So
At least that's as
yeah,
far as our instruments could penetrate.
yeah.
But we don't know if there are even deeper levels. That's where I think a methodology like SAR
Mhm.
could really come handy.
Exactly, yeah. Because if we can go, I mean, Filippo said in certain conditions they could go up to 5 kilometers down. But if we can go, just below 18, I'm sure we're going to see much more very interesting stuff at all these sites. So amazing. Um, Here's the book again, everyone. Please check this one out because it's such a fantastic piece of work. And all your work you've done at Mitla and throughout Mexico has been so appreciated. And yeah, I think we'll try and meet up in Mexico maybe this year or do another update once you do more work at these other sites and have another talk or something. But maybe we'll just make another film in person together if we can. But
I
yeah,
will be looking forward to that. That will be fantastic. And thank you, Trevor.
yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for joining me today, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.